Has anyone ever told you that you were the problem, just to avoid blame?
I will not pretend I handled it with grace, because when your own parents send a two-word apology for missing the one birthday you secretly hoped would be different, the one you told yourself would be the fresh start after years of swallowing it and smiling anyway. And then you open your phone and see their faces beaming from a cake that clearly belongs to your sister while a caption about family and blessings sits under it like a dare. Something in your chest stops asking for scraps and starts asking what it would look like to stop playing along, and that switch, once it flips, does not flip back. I woke up that morning telling myself not to expect anything, which is a lie I have told so many times it almost sounds wise, and still there was that small childish part of me that thought maybe they had learned. Maybe they remembered how I always show up, how I always send the card, how I always call first, so when the message came through, "Sorry, busy," I stared at it long enough that my screen dimmed and I thought, this is what it feels like to be told without ceremony that you do not rank. And while I wish I could tell you I let it go, the truth is I clicked into social media out of muscle memory, and there they were, my mom leaning in, my dad holding a plate, my sister Rachel laughing with a glittery sash I will not describe because it does not matter. What matters is that my parents were not busy with a work emergency or a hospital visit or anything that could survive the light. They were busy being available for someone else's moment while mine was treated like a chore that could be ignored. I took a screenshot for no one but myself, not because I needed proof for later, but because it felt like putting a pin in a map, a small marker that says here is where you stopped pretending your family's habits were harmless. And I sat there on the edge of the bed thinking about how every time I have raised this before, I was told I am sensitive, I am dramatic, I am reading into things. And I remembered how they did not show up to my work award because traffic was supposedly unbearable, and how they left my graduate celebration early because Rachel's boyfriend had a game, and how the story always became that I am the one who should understand, that I am independent, that I do not need fuss. And I suddenly realized that being strong had become their excuse to never show up, which is not a compliment. It is a convenient misunderstanding they have trained themselves to believe. I typed out a reply they would recognize, "No worries, hope you're having a good day," and then I deleted it, because I am done cushioning them from the truth that words have weight. And I went to our family thread and I did the thing you only do when you are finished negotiating with yourself about whether you deserve basic respect, which is that I hit block on both of them, not with a speech, not with a warning. Just a clean click that cut the line they tug whenever they want me quiet, and it was both petty and perfect, because for once I did not give them the satisfaction of my polite acceptance. I gave them silence, and the silence, it turns out, was loud. Blocking them felt like pulling a plug, and for a few minutes there was nothing, just the odd quiet you get after a machine turns off, and then my phone lit up like a slot machine because the group chat noticed instantly, with an aunt asking if everything is okay, a cousin dropping a question mark, my dad sending a separate message that said let's not be childish, and my mom following with a voice note that I refused to play because I already know the script, and the only person who did not say anything at all was Rachel, which told me what I needed to know, because silence from the star of the show is not kindness, it is calculation, and I have lived too long in that theater to miss the cue. I wish I could tell you I cried or I raged, but what I felt was colder and more useful, a kind of stillness that lets you see the board, and in that stillness I thought about how families like ours survive on plausible deniability, on the idea that nothing is ever meant to hurt, that timing is unfortunate, that you are making drama by naming what is obvious. And I realized if I wanted anything to change I would have to stop asking them to admit it and start showing them what it looks like when the ignored person refuses to play the role. So I did the most honest thing I could think of, which was nothing, because nothing can be a mirror, and I let their messages stack like unpaid bills. The hook, if you are waiting for one, is not that I blocked my parents on my birthday, although plenty of people would already call that extreme. The hook is what I decided to do with the evidence they handed me. Because the photos and the caption were not just mean, they were public, and when people who depend on their image choose to humiliate you in a way that is easy to show, you do not argue with them in private where they can spin it and minimize it and cast you as ungrateful. You let their own choices speak for them in a room they cannot control, And that is the moment I stopped thinking like the overlooked daughter and started thinking like someone who knows exactly where to press. Before I pressed anything, I took one honest breath and asked myself if I was doing this to hurt them or to stop being hurt, and the answer surprised me, because I did not want revenge in the throw-a-glass sense. I wanted balance. I wanted them to feel even 1 hour of the cold I have stood in for years, and I wanted that feeling to come not from drama but from clarity. So when my dad pinged me again with a line about how Rachel's party had been planned for weeks and surely I understand, I did not respond with the history lesson he deserves. I simply posted a single sentence in the family thread that read, "I appreciate the honesty," and then I changed the group chat settings so only admins could post, and I removed myself from admin. Which meant they could itch and rage and flail, but they could not reach me, and that tiny administrative move felt like the first real gift I had given myself in a long time. What I did next is the part that made the group chat explode, the part that turned a quiet block into a family crisis with witnesses, because if they were so proud of the day they chose, then there should be no problem with me making sure everyone who always tells me to keep the peace sees exactly how that peace gets made. And I will tell you how I set that up and why Rachel finally broke her silence. But first you need to know that by the end of that night, before I had even finished my dinner, there were so many missed calls on my screen that my phone looked like a slot machine gone wild, and I had not said a single rude word, which, if you have ever dealt with people who hide behind politeness, you know is its own kind of victory. If you have ever trained yourself to accept less because fighting for more always turns into a courtroom where you are the only one without a lawyer, you will understand how easy it is to call something an accident when it keeps happening in the same direction. Because as I sat there with my parents' cheerful captions still glowing on my screen, I could have told myself the old story about unfortunate timing and overlapping plans, except every memory that matters lined up like file folders, marked with the same label, and it was impossible to ignore that the pattern was not random. It was a policy that nobody announced out loud. A policy that said Rachel's milestones are family events and mine are personal errands that I should handle myself with a smile and a photo after the fact. I remember the night of my high school graduation when I spotted them slipping out early with the explanation that they had promised to stop by a dinner for Rachel's boyfriend's team, and how my mother kissed my forehead and said, "We will celebrate properly this weekend, sweetie," and how the weekend celebration turned into pizza on paper plates because the restaurant was too crowded and there was supposedly no way to make a reservation on short notice, and I remember how I posted a thank you anyway, because you learn fast that being publicly gracious is the only way to avoid being labeled difficult, which is a word people love to throw at any woman who asks for equal energy. I remember the work award years later when I invited them with careful padding, months in advance and with gentle reminders, and the traffic was supposedly unbearable that night. And somehow the same traffic did not touch them the following evening when Rachel had a small thing at a friend's place across town, and I told myself it is fine because I am independent, and they say it like a compliment, as if being self-sufficient means you are most comfortable alone, when the truth is I learned to be good at being alone because the alternative was begging for company that never arrives. Even the little traditions stung in that quiet way that accumulates, like how my birthdays turned into phone calls squeezed between their obligations while Rachel's were mapped out with themes and inside jokes and coordinated timelines. And how any time I raised a concern the story flipped on me in seconds, and I was told I was making them feel guilty over things they could not control. Which is a spectacular trick because it turns basic accountability into cruelty, and then I am the villain for noticing the difference between an apology and a habit. So when I finally opened the family thread after hours of ignoring the notifications that kept rolling in like waves, I was not surprised by the script. I was just exhausted by the accuracy of it. Because my mother had written a paragraph about how I should have told them sooner if I needed them today, as if the day had crept up on me like a surprise holiday and not been sitting on the calendar since the day I was born. And my father had offered a line about Rachel's party being planned for weeks and how it would have been rude to cancel, as if I had asked them to cancel anything and not simply asked them to acknowledge me with something that sounded human. And a few relatives chimed in with soft little cushion phrases about misunderstandings and hurt feelings and staying positive. the digital version of patting my head and handing me a lollipop. What cut deeper than the messages, though, was the complete quiet from Rachel in the thread while her social stories kept updating like a ticker. One little video of my parents singing while the room cheered. Another clip where someone shouted a joke about me probably sitting alone with a cupcake, and even though it was a throwaway line that people excuse as humor. I have been alive long enough to understand that those jokes eat at you because they are built on a truth everyone recognizes, but nobody will admit in daylight, and that is when the heat in my chest settled into something more useful than fury, a steadiness that said, you do not have to argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You can show them what they look like from the outside, and let them argue with their own reflection. I did not clap back in the chat because I know how that story ends, with me being told I escalated, I dramatized, I ruined the mood. So instead I opened a new album on my phone and titled it with a word that has been thrown at me for years, busy. And I started dropping in screenshots and photos that I have never organized because I did not want to keep score. A little collage of moments where I am standing next to something I achieved while the comments read, so proud of you, and my parents' names are missing, and then right next to it the bright, careful pictures from Rachel's milestones with my parents dead center in every frame. And I arranged the pairs without captions because it turns out silence is more persuasive than a paragraph when the contrast is this clean. I sent that album privately to exactly 3 people who spread family news like it is their job, an aunt who loves fairness, as long as it makes her look wise, a cousin who has never met a secret she did not forward, and a godmother who thinks diplomacy means telling both sides they are right, and I did not add a single sentence beyond thought you should see this, because the fastest way to lose a room like mine is to sound like you are building a case, whereas the surest way to make them gasp is to let them see what they have chosen not to see, and I knew that within an hour the album would be in the phones of people who always tell me to stop making trouble and be kind, and I wanted them to have to stare at the arithmetic without me doing the math out loud. The group chat flipped almost immediately from scolding to defensive confusion as texts rolled in from relatives who were not in the original thread but now had context. And my father wrote that sharing private family moments was a betrayal, and my mother tried the line about perspective and how every family has seasons, and then finally, because pressure finds the quietest person and squeezes. Rachel messaged me privately with a tone that was not sorry so much as annoyed, a neat little paragraph about how I was making something small into a public drama and how if I had an issue I should have told her directly, and how she hoped I would not ruin the barbecue they are hosting in 2 weeks because the whole family has been looking forward to it. I stared at her message and felt the piece slide into place because I had been unsure what the endgame should look like, and she had just handed me the venue and the guest list and the timeline, and I typed back one sentence that read, I hear you. And then another that said, I will handle my part, and I meant it in the most literal way, because I had decided that if my parents need an audience to understand gravity, then I would give them an audience they cannot control, and I would do it without ranting, without insults, without a single word they could twist, and I would make sure that when I left that barbecue, nobody could say they did not know, which is why I started sketching the one thing they care about more than being right, which is being seen as good. And how I use that will make sense when you see what I carried into their backyard and where I put it, but for now I will tell you only this. Before I fell asleep that night, I pressed share to a wider list, and by morning the album had traveled so far that my mother texted me a single sentence I had never seen from her before. Not I am sorry, not we were wrong, but please do not come tomorrow unless you are ready to behave, and I almost laughed, because she had no idea what behaving was about to look like. The minute the album started moving through the family like a rumor with screenshots, the thread that had been scolding me for being sensitive shifted into the kind of frantic performance people give when they realize the audience has grown. Because my aunt who loves to look wise started asking clarifying questions she already knew the answers to, my dad began typing the sort of calm sentences he saves for outsiders about misunderstandings and love and perspective, and my mom wrote one of those tidy paragraphs about how they always do their best and sometimes plans collide and nobody meant to hurt anyone, which might have worked if the evidence did not show them literally celebrating someone else while telling me they were unavailable. And as I watched them do damage control in real time, I felt something unclench in my chest. Not relief exactly, but recognition that the thing I have been arguing with for years was finally being seen without me narrating it into existence. I knew better than to jump in and start arguing point by point, because nothing kills your credibility faster with this audience than sounding angry. So I kept my hands off the keyboard and let the thread breathe while my phone buzzed with private messages that said everything the public ones did not. A cousin telling me in a whisper message that she had always noticed the difference and felt sick seeing it laid out. An uncle warning me to be careful because my parents were hurt, and people say rash things when they feel exposed. And then finally a message from Rachel that did not bother with sympathy and went straight to management. A smooth little note about how I was turning a small oversight into a public scene. How she loved me and had planned to drop off something for me the next day, and how she really hoped I would not bring this energy to the barbecue they were hosting in 2 weeks, because the whole family was excited, and it would be a shame to sour it. Her text used that word that always makes my mouth go dry, oversight, as if forgetting your child's milestone while standing in matching smiles at another child's party is the sort of clerical error a good calendar app could fix. And while part of me wanted to copy and paste every example I have swallowed over the years and demand she tell me which ones were oversights and which were choices, the steadier part of me knew that she was not writing to apologize. She was writing to keep the room under control, which meant the only useful response was one that stayed calm and made no promise I did not intend to keep. So I told her I hurt her and that I would handle my part. And I meant it in the most literal way, because I had already decided that if my family only understands impact when it is public and undeniable, I would give them a version of public that was impossible to reframe without looking ridiculous. The funniest and saddest thing about the next hour is that my parents kept insisting they had not posted anything to hurt me, as if the lack of intent erases the outcome. And while I agree that not every bad thing is malicious, I also know that repeated disregard produces the same bruise whether the hand meant to hit or not. So instead of entering the ring, I did one small thing that felt almost surgical, which was to go to the post where they were tagged and leave a single comment that read, "Thank you for being busy today. I appreciate the clarity," followed by a heart, which I know sounds petty, but hear me out, because it was not a tantrum, it was a mirror. And I posted it not at midnight when only the night owls would see it, but in the late afternoon window when our tribe scrolls and sips coffee and measures each other's lives. Within minutes, a cousin I barely hear from chimed under my comment with one of those sideways questions about whether there had been a scheduling mix-up. A family friend added a reminder about empathy that read like a subtweet, and then my dad, seeing the thread he could not control, texted me directly with a sentence that belongs in a museum of missed points. "Let's not humiliate your mother," as if the humiliation began with my words and not with their picture, and I sat with that and realized that in our family the true sin is not the wound, it is the announcement of the wound, which is why I have spent years acting like a one-person public relations team for people who always ask me to understand and rarely bother to do the same. Because I am done with the quiet fixes that protect their story at the expense of my sanity, I took the next step in a way that made me feel steady rather than cruel, and that was to accept the invitation I did not actually receive, which is the unspoken expectation that I would attend the usual Sunday dinner the next day, a weekly ritual that functions as their stage for unity, and I texted in the group that I would be there, and that I would bring something. And the thread exhaled with relief. So audible I could almost hear it through the screen. My mother replying with a relieved thank you, my father dropping a thumbs up, a couple of relatives sending little celebration words as if the crisis had passed. And I let them have that false peace for the night because I needed the time to prepare the thing I promised to bring, something so simple and so clean that even the most diplomatic aunt would have a hard time spinning it into my hysteria. Before I went to bed, I did one more surgical thing, small enough to look harmless, but precise enough to sting, which was to change the caption on my own birthday photo from last year to a line that said "Celebrating quietly again. Thank you to those who remember without being reminded," and I tagged nobody. I did not point any fingers. I just let it sit where the same crowd that cheered for Rachel in real time would bump into it on their way through the feed, and almost instantly I saw who saved it, who sent it, who pretended not to see, and because people like my parents are allergic to being the villain in public, My mother texted me an hour later to say she was glad I was coming tomorrow and that we could clear the air in person, which was framed as kindness, but read like a warning, because clearing the air in our house means rewriting what happened until it fits the version where I am too sensitive and they are doing their best. What kept me from spiraling was the decision I had already made and the tool I had already built, that quiet album labeled busy that now lived in half the phones that would show up to dinner. So tomorrow was never going to be a negotiation in a private kitchen where my mother cries and my father gets weary and I end up apologizing for needing anything. Tomorrow was going to be a simple demonstration in a room where they care very much about how they look, and I would not need to raise my voice or list grievances. I would only need to set something down where everyone could see it and then stay calm when they tried to grab it away. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was not the comment or the album or even the acceptance of dinner. It was the restraint that let me hold my move until it would land without me lifting a finger. And as I closed my eyes, I pictured the exact place in their living room where things get displayed when they want compliments, and I knew that if I could put my proof there for even 10 minutes, the room would do the rest for me. Which is why I fell asleep for the first time in a long stretch, without that tight knot in my stomach, because for once I was done asking them to understand and had chosen to make understanding unavoidable, and the only outstanding question, the one that hummed in the back of my mind like a low electric sound, was whether Rachel would try to intercept me at the door or whether she would wait until I set it down, and I was oddly fine with either, because the piece was already on the board and tomorrow it would move. I showed up the next day with the thing I promised to bring, which was not food or flowers or some peace offering that would make everyone feel better without anything changing, but a simple hardcover book I had made overnight from the album on my phone. The kind you can order for pickup if you refuse to let momentum cool, and while part of me wondered if that was petty or theatrical, the steadier part knew that my family only understands what is printed and displayed and passed around, so I walked in, said hello in a tone nobody could call hostile, set the book on the table where they keep coffee and bragging, and told my mother that since we were clearing the air I wanted to make sure we were all looking at the same air. Then I stepped back and let gravity do its job, because nothing in those pages needed my commentary to make the point. The cover was one word, busy, and inside it was exactly what I had already arranged in the album, pair after pair of moments that did not require a caption to be understood. On the left me at milestones that mattered to me, a degree, a new job, a health scare I got through without asking anyone to carry me, with either no sign of them or a perfunctory message that landed after midnight, and on the right Rachel at moments big and small with my parents front and center, and the first page, which I knew would set the tone, was the screenshot of their text saying sorry, busy next to their bright smiles from Rachel's party that same day, which I did not annotate because the timestamp already did the math. And as my aunt lifted the book with a soft laugh she uses when she senses tension, the room started doing that tight little shuffle people do when a script is off its rails, and they are deciding whether to pretend or pivot. My father cleared his throat and asked me to sit so we could talk like adults, which is his way of setting the expectation that I will be calm and reasonable while they push the conversation back to the comfortable place where everything is a misunderstanding. And I told him I would sit after everyone saw the book, because that is how we will be talking like adults, with shared facts instead of moods, and I watched my mother's face do that thing where she prepares tears like a weapon she can sheath if you fold first. Then my uncle, who usually stays neutral by telling long stories about the past, flipped a few pages and muttered a quiet "oh" that no one could mistake for approval, and it occurred to me that I did not need a single speech to make this work. I just needed to keep my hands off the book while it made its way around the room and let them feel the chill of being caught by their own smiles. Because I knew they would try to move the conversation into posture and tone and intent, I said one line the second my mother started in with the "we never meant to hurt you" script, a line I had practiced so it would land clean without heat, and it was this: intent lives in your mouth, impact lives in my life, and this book is my life. After which I sat down and drank the coffee I brought myself, because I did not want to owe them the smallest courtesy while we discussed the big ones, and when my Father reached for the book like he might close it and put it away. I quietly set my hand on the cover and said it stays out until we finish, which earned me a look from an aunt who has always believed that the biggest sin is making a scene. But I held the line because I am done trading truth for manners, especially in a house that hides behind manners every time truth knocks. The arguments came anyway, because they always do, my father telling me that sharing private family matters outside the house was disrespectful, my mother insisting that perspective matters, and that if we zoomed out the picture would look kinder. An aunt asking whether I had considered that Rachel did not plan her party to target me, which was the wrong door to open, because I had not accused Rachel of plotting anything, I had only held up the result, yet Rachel jumped in with the tone of someone who has been waiting to perform confidence, explaining that her party date had been on the calendar for weeks and that she had expected our parents to manage their time like adults. And I watched her talk about logistics as if logistics were the missing piece, and I understood in that moment that she needed me to position this as a scheduling snafu, because that keeps her pedestal upright and leaves me looking petty for taking it personally. So I let her finish and then said one sentence that sliced through all of it, which was, I do not care how you scheduled anything, I care how you chose me. Since they love structure and boundaries when they get to set them, I gave them a boundary they could not misinterpret, and that did not require a single apology to be valid. And I did it in the most boring voice I could manage so they would hear the terms instead of any heat, telling them that going forward if I am optional to them then their events are optional to me. Which means I will decline with no explanation, and I will not be in rooms where I am expected to clap for people who cannot be bothered to show up for me when it is not convenient, and, because they know I mean it, I added that the only exceptions will be funerals and emergencies, and otherwise I am reclaiming my time. And while someone in the back made a small protest about family unity, my uncle, the one who muttered earlier, said into his coffee that unity without fairness is a photo op, and the silence that followed was the first honest moment our family has had in years. I did not leave it there, because boundaries are the start not the end, and because my parents value their image more than anything, I made a second move that took 10 seconds and could not be undone without looking petty, which was to take the book, walk it over to the display shelf where they keep vacation albums and wedding photos, and set it right in the middle with the cover facing out. Then I thanked my mother for hosting and told them I had another commitment and would head out, which triggered the inevitable grab for control, my mother asking me to take the book with me if I insisted on being dramatic, my father saying we should keep private things private, and I told them with the same boring voice that this was not a private thing. It is our family's public habit, and if they really want it removed they can explain to everyone who asks why the busy book was there in the first place. What I did not expect, but should have, was the way my leaving gave oxygen to everyone else, because the minute I stepped onto the porch my phone started lighting with messages from relatives who had held their tongues inside, but were suddenly very brave. Some offering real support, some offering advice I did not ask for, and one from my godmother that said she finally saw what I meant and that she hoped we could all find a way back, which I ignored because the way back only exists if there is a way forward that does not require me to shrink. And then, an hour after I got home, Rachel messaged me privately again, and this time it was not management, it was nervous. A long paragraph about how there are things I do not know and that she would rather tell me in person, not because she wanted to absolve our parents, but because she was tired too. And she asked if we could meet before the barbecue in 2 weeks, because she did not want me to do something that would blow up the family forever. And I sat there reading that line about things I do not know and felt that steady click you feel when the last card in a house of cards gives way, because if Rachel is volunteering a meeting, then there is a truth on the table that she thinks could change how I play my next move. I told her yes, not because I need her blessing or because I am softening, but because information is power and I have finally started playing the same game everyone else has been playing with me. And while I will not tell you what she said yet because it belongs to the final act, I will say this much. By the time the barbecue rolled around, I was done being the person who reacts. I had become the person who sets the stage. And the thing I carried into their yard made the book look like a whisper. Before the barbecue, I met Rachel in a coffee place that has no nostalgia attached to it, so neither of us could use the room as an excuse, and she surprised me by skipping the small talk and going straight for the thing she had been circling in those careful texts, telling me that while she is not the architect of our parents' choices, she has been the beneficiary and the shield, that our mother has been telling the extended family for years that I prefer to keep birthdays low-key and that I get overwhelmed by attention, and that I have even asked them not to make a fuss, which is a neat revision built from a few tired texts I sent years ago when I was trying to look cool about being sidelined. And then she said the part that made me sit back hard, that our parents have been framing my independence as distance to earn sympathy, and that when anyone asks why I am not in photos or why my milestones look quiet, our mother says I like it that way, and that I am private and serious. And Rachel admitted she used that line too because it made things easier, and then she looked at me with a kind of flat honesty and said she is tired of it and that she is not asking me to spare her at the barbecue. She is asking me to make it so obvious that even she cannot hide behind the script anymore. I drove to the barbecue with exactly 2 things in the trunk and no speech rehearsed, because speeches are how they derail you and drag you into tone and posture, while objects are simple and stubborn. And the first thing was a trifold board like the ones kids use at school, but with clean columns. On the left a list titled What I Covered, and on the right a list titled What You Showed Up For, and every line on the left had a date and a simple description. The month I handled the deductible, when Dad had that procedure. The month I covered the car insurance shortfall. The several months I paid the extra on their mortgage when they said the rate adjustment surprised them. The year I kept their cell plan alive without asking for a penny. And every line on the right had a matching date and a single yes or no, not because I wanted pity or applause, but because I wanted arithmetic. And the second thing was a neat stack of envelopes with one sentence on the front, clarity for you to keep. And inside each was a copy of the sorry, busy message and the party screenshots, plus a short letter that said I am ending all automatic payments in 30 days. I will not attend events where I am optional. And if you ask me why I am not there, please read this again before you call me ungrateful. I walked through their gate with a casserole dish as decoy because our family believes carrying food proves goodwill. Set the board on the buffet table where they lay out other people's contributions and compliments. Propped it so it could not be flipped without making a scene. Placed the envelopes next to the napkins where everyone would reach for them with the same casual entitlement they bring to the food. And then I said hello to my mother and thanked her for hosting and asked for a glass of water, because doing normal things while the truth sits in the middle of the room is a discipline they have trained me for, and today I used it back on them. And for the first several minutes there was that pleasant hum they choreograph for guests. And then the hum kinked as people started reading the right column, and then the left, and then started doing the matching in their heads, and a cousin said my name in a tone that sounded like a seatbelt clicking, and an aunt reached for an envelope and shouted lightly that I had made party favors, and after that the noise in the yard changed in that way adults know but pretend not to notice. My father came over with a smile that did not make it to his eyes and said we should talk privately, and I said we would after the board had been up for the length of time my last birthday phone call lasted, which even he understood as fair once he did the math. And my mother tried to take down the board by calling it inappropriate for guests, but the guests were already reading and talking and quietly recalibrating, and one of our older relatives, who never sides with anyone until she is sure she will be on the winning team, put a hand on my arm and said that families need records sometimes, which in our language is a declaration of amnesty for the person holding the pen. And I stood there and let them do the sorting because I had already decided not to raise my voice, not to explain, not to defend, and not to list history. Since listing history is how they get you arguing over one date or another until the whole picture disappears. When the envelopes were open and the first wave of calls for détente began, when the apologies started coming in that careful style that never names the action, when my mother began to cry in the way she does when she wants me to carry her feelings while she ignores mine, I moved to the second part of the plan, and it was not dramatic so much as administrative, because I pulled out a single page and read it in a normal voice that carried, because people were already quiet, telling them that I am stepping out of the family finance role I never volunteered for, that the automatic payments will stop at the end of next month. That if there is a medical emergency, I will respond like any decent person, but otherwise I am done subsidizing a story where I am the independent one who needs nothing while also being the safety net who fixes everything. And I added that the money I free up will go into a small fund in our grandparents' names to be used for any niece or nephew who needs help getting somewhere important so long as the adults in their life show up for each other, which is a line designed to land on the people who love optics more than obligations. I did not look at Rachel while I said it, but I felt her stand with me, because she stepped into the silence and said she had told them I deserve equal energy and that she is done being the reason they do not give it. And then she did something I did not ask for but will never forget, which was to pull out her own phone and read a message our mother sent her earlier in the week that said, "Do not push your sister's birthday. She hates celebrations. She told me that years ago." And Rachel said into the yard that she knew that was not true anymore, and that she had used it to keep peace, and that she would not do it again. And the look on my mother's face told me two things at once: that she had counted on the old script holding, and that she was scrambling for a new one while the audience was not buying it. There was no shouting after that because there did not need to be, just a rapid rearrangement of loyalty that happens when people understand the photo they have been looking at was cropped, and my father asked again to talk privately, and I said we could, but that this, the public arithmetic, was the conversation, and we stood at the edge of the patio where nobody could say later that I ambushed them, and he tried the line about humiliation, and I said humiliation is what happens when the truth surfaces after years of pretending, and he asked what I wanted, and I said I wanted exactly what is on the board, no more and no less, which is for the column on the right to have more yes than no in the future, and for the column on the left to stop existing unless it is offered to me when I need it, and that until I see that, I will not be in rooms where my presence is only useful as proof that we are fine. I left before the food was served because I did not want to be softened by the ritual of sitting and passing and pretending, and as I reached the sidewalk my phone started exploding with the expected mix of outrage and relief. And I ignored all of it except one message from Rachel that arrived before I had started the car, a message that said thank you for doing what I should have done a long time ago, followed by another that said she is pregnant and that she refused to announce it today, because she did not want our mother to use it like a curtain to pull across the mess, and that she will not let the next child in this family learn that love means chasing people who are always busy. And I sat there and let that news settle with no dramatic music, just a clear understanding that the story I told today was not just mine, it was a boundary for whoever comes next. The family group chat kept buzzing for days with rewrites and revisions, and then a strange quiet as the new reality took root, because it turns out when you pull the plug on the parts of yourself that keep a system comfortable, the system has to learn to breathe without you, and that is not my emergency, and while there will be fallout and while they will test the door to see if it opens as easily as before, the answer is simple now, because I did not slam it, I closed it and turned the lock, and slid the key into my own pocket, and if anyone asks whether that was too far I will say it was exactly far enough, because the point was never punishment, it was clarity, and clarity, once you have it, is the one thing that does not ask you to apologize for taking up space.